Hi everybody, Bearded Rogue here, and today I want to talk to you about a game that is coming from Buttonshy. It's the standalone sequel to this, Avignon, A Clash of Popes. It's called Pilgrimage, and it is a completely standalone expansion of sorts. So, for those who don't know, Avignon, A Clash of Popes is one of my favorite two-player games of all time. It's extremely simple. It like all Buttonshy games, fits in one of these tiny wallets. That includes the instructions and everything else. And it's really simple to teach, really easy to play. I have a really nifty playmat for it that I didn't actually get out, which I got as part of the Kickstarter for this when it was kickstarted. But it's one of my favorite little two-player games of all time. I first played it at Unpub 2 years ago, and played it so much and loved it so much that the designer actually gave me a prototype copy. I then played the crap out of that and carried it in my bag everywhere I went, and when I got my official Buttonshy version, I carried it everywhere. It's one of the few games that I take with me to every convention because I can play it in any line. I can play it with anybody while we're waiting for people to, do whatever they're doing, finish their business, use the bathroom, set up a game, whatever. It's really quick, really fast, really good. But we're not here to talk about Clash of Popes today. We're here to talk about Pilgrimage, which is a standalone expansion. So the original game had 6 different characters, 2 of each, for 12 cards in the deck, and then all of the characters had their own little special abilities, but the game is pretty simple. The newer version, Pilgrimage, is a little bit more, I don't want to say, let's say brain-burny. The abilities aren't nearly as straightforward as those on the original 6 characters. It is a full standalone game, so you will get the same location that you got in the other game. So you can play this with or without the original version of the game. And as a standalone game, it's alright. I think it's pretty good. I don't think that as a standalone game it lives up to its predecessor, mostly because of the extra complications, which we'll get into in a minute when I go through the characters. But as an expansion for the original game, I think it really shines. So let's take an example here. So in the original game, we had the Cardinal. So, the Cardinal's petition ability is that you could move him closer to your rival, and then move everybody else closer to you, which counted as 2 actions. But that's the Cardinal. In this expansion, all of the characters now have a faction, which is under their name, Cardinal. So this guy, the Nuncio, actually counts as a Cardinal for anything that references cardinals. So if both of these guys were on the table at once, like say you were mixing the base game and the expansion, this right here, where you can move a cardinal, would actually let you move the Nuncio. And this right here, which would let you move the Nuncio, actually applies to the cardinal as well. These guys are interchangeable, however their abilities are slightly different. Whereas the cardinal lets you move everybody else, the Nuncio specifically lets you move anybody that shares a location with him. So you basically push him away, and then wherever he ends up, everybody who's in that space comes back to you. Pretty cool ability. He's one of my favorite characters in the new set. But the fact that these can be mixed is really interesting. You could use just 2 Nuncios with the other characters from the original game. You could continue to use 1 Cardinal and 1 Nuncio, or you could use the 1 Cardinal and use one of the other characters and mix it in. But all of the new characters have that faction. So the Nuncio is the answer to the Cardinal in the game. The Vicar is the answer to the Bishop. So the Bishop has this whole pull a Bishop, and then your rival pulls anybody else. The Vicar is a little bit more complicated in that he pushes any bishop twice. Then he gets to, this is a new symbol for the expansion, although not a new ability, he gets to excommunicate any other character, just like you would using the excommunicate action. And then you pull that character towards you. So this guy has a built-in excommunicate action which is something we haven't seen before. I really like this guy as well. The excommunicate action is something that I am personally very fond of, and so having it built into a card, much like the pushes and pulls, which are also basic actions, really works for me. Again, he is also counts as a bishop, so these two are interchangeable. You could use one of each when you play. You could use two bishops. You could use two vicars. Either way. Really cool to have this guy. I like this guy as well. The next one, which is really fun. So the previous expansion had the Inquisitor, which you would push the Inquisitor towards your opponent, and then you could pull any other, or you could pull a Cardinal twice. This guy was really useful for getting Cardinals off the board to yourself, or just removing them from the board to keep them from being weapons for anybody else, or because the Cardinal's ability requires you to push him towards your opponent, giving you some room to actually use that Cardinal ability to pull everybody else towards you. Very versatile role. I really like the Inquisitor. I also really like the Canonist. Again, ability's a little more brain-burny in that you're switching the locations of two characters. And then you push one and you pull the other. Really simple as far as what he does, but the swapping two things has all sorts of implications inside of the game, which is really interesting. This is one that I really like swapping out while I love the Inquisitor. This guy makes for some really interesting combinations, particularly with the Noble Knight Peasant win condition trifecta in the original game. So, really neat. I like the Canonist. Next, we have the Courtesan. The Courtesan is the Knight equivalent in this. So the Knight lets you push two other characters towards your opponent, and then you pull a Knight 2 spaces. The Courtesan actually lets you pull a character to you that's closer to your rival than the Courtesan is. So if the Courtesan is closer to you than any other character on the board, you can pull that character closer to you, and then of course pull it again with a regular pull action. So this one's also really good. This is probably the most simple of any of them, but one of the things you'll notice here with the Canonist swapping people's in spaces and the Nuncio actually caring about which location people are in. Locations are much more important in this expansion. It's not so much just about the distance between you and or between the character and you or the character and your opponent. These sideboard tiles, which just mark the spaces in the board, actually make much more of a difference in this version of the game. So that's the Courtesan. Also like the Courtesan. So now we get to the two characters that are the most dependent on location. I'm going to cover one of them first, and then I'm going to cover the alternate win condition character as well, because the alternate win condition character exists, just like in the last one, but it's a little bit more tricky. So first, we had the Peasant in the original one, and that's a rival. Can go ahead and push any character. The Ascetic is a little bit busier. Again, a little bit more complicated. But if the Ascetic ends their turn in Avignon or Rome, then you move it one space closer to Genoa. Genoa is the center line, for everybody who doesn't know. So if it's in Avignon or Rome, which are the rows right before the end, right before you pull it off the board, then it moves back towards the center. So this is somebody that is harder to get, and you can often push these guys towards your opponent for other effects. Like, for example, the Canonist. You can swap somebody with an Ascetic so that the Ascetic is near the opponent, and the card that you do not want your opponent to have is closer to you. And then you have this guy bounce back towards the center at the end of your turn, and you pull the other guy towards you as well. So these guys I've found, while I like the ability, and I like the fact that they tie into the location, they also count as a peasant, by the way. These can sometimes delay the game because they will not progress. Like, oftentimes I find myself deliberately excommunicating these guys just because they kind of slow the game down a bit. In that you either have to make a concerted effort to pull one of these guys off the table as soon as you see it, or in my case, I just excommunicate them so I don't mess with them. I'm sure that there's some cool things you could do with these guys, but they're a little bit more brain-burny than the basic Peasant, and so this is one of the cards, probably the only one that I'm not super huge on. But again, stressing the location aspect of things. Which gets us to the final character, which is the Scribe. So the Scribe is our alternate win condition character, like the Noble in the first one. So the Noble's win conditions are really easy. If you have a Noble and your opponent has a Knight, you win. If you have a Noble and a Peasant, you lose. So the nobles don't want to associate with the peasants, and the nobles can command the knights to kill your rival. Really simple, really easy to understand. The Scribe is a little bit more complex. First of all, the Scribe actually has a petition ability, which the noble does not. In this case, you're pushing the Scribe. Then, you can either push or pull any in a path that is adjacent to the Scribe. So when the Scribe's on the table, if the Vicar is in this path, it doesn't matter where along the path he is. If he's in the path next to the Scribe, you can affect him with that ability. So he not only cares about location on the board, he also cares about location left to right relative to the other characters. But his win condition is at the start of the turn, if he's in Genoa, if he's in the middle of the board, and you have 2 in your congregation, you win. So, most of the time, you win by either having 3 people in your congregation, or by, in the original version, one of the noble win conditions. In this case, you can win if you have 2 in your congregation and the Scribe is in the middle of the board. So, these guys are hotly contested over. They are moved constantly. You will often use their petition just to get them out of the middle. You will excommunicate these guys. I found that the win condition on the Scribe comes up a lot less in the game than the Noble's win condition. Now, the Scribe is at the start of your turn, so your opponent has an opportunity, has a whole turn to try to do something with it with their 2 actions. So it's not like you can just set this guy in Genoa with your 2 guys and ha ha ha, I'm fine. They're going to mess with you. And then you could use your turn to kind of redo that so that he's now in the middle again, and then your opponent will use their next turn to kind of mess with that. And unfortunately, much like the Ascetic, this guy can sometimes lead to really annoying loops. Now, I prefer the Scribe to the Ascetic. I think the Scribe creates more interesting scenarios than the Ascetic does, but it also has the tendency to create some loops and some brain burniness that forces you to think further ahead. I think it's a cool idea for a character. Again, it counts as a noble, so you can use it in place of the noble in the base version, which is actually very interesting. This guy is much more exciting in the other set of characters, where the knight and the peasant no longer are part of the win condition, and instead it's all about getting 2 and having one of these guys in the center. So, I don't know. I don't like it as much as the original game as a standalone game. I don't think it's as good of a game. It's a little bit more thinky than I want out of a quick game. But I think all of the characters are very interesting to mix and match into the original set. And I've only played 2 games where I used half of each, because normally you use 2 of every character when you play, but you could take 1 ascetic and 1 peasant, and 1 vicar and 1 bishop, and 1 nuncio and 1 cardinal, and play half and half that way. And I've only played a couple of games that way, but I found that it really is interesting and forces you to think more. I think that's kind of the key for this expansion, is that if you played the original game and thought, this is really cool, but I wish there was more to it, then you're going to love the standalone expansion. Pilgrimage is fantastic in that regard. If you played the base game and you went, this is exactly what I want, some of the pilgrimage stuff might be a little bit more complicated than you want. But I still think that it's good as a mix and match game. It is standalone on its own, so you can just hop in on that bandwagon and just start with pilgrimage. I don't think it's a bad game. Like, just only in comparison to the original version do I think it's a little bit weaker of a set. But It's really great as expansion characters. If the original game, if like me, you've played over 100 games of the original version of the game, having some new characters to mix in and mix it up is really welcome and entertaining. This is going up on Kickstarter very shortly. I will be backing it for certain. It's a fantastic game. As far as like the overall Avignon experience, and I think the individual characters each add something to the experience that as I play more will deepen the experience. I guess that's the biggest thing I can say about this expansion is that it's more complicated, there's more gears turning, there's a little bit more meat to it, and so I think it will reward more plays um, in that regard. I don't know that the plays that I've gotten in with it have been enough for me to really grasp all the strategies. Like I said, the ascetic and the scribe are a little bit more to wrap your head around as far as getting out of loops back and forth with other players. So until I've gotten a little bit more experience with that, I think it's going to be a little bit lower than the original version of the game. But it's still a fantastic game. I still recommend it. And if you have the original, I highly recommend it, because the ability to mix and match these guys in with the originals is just too good to pass up. It's going to take one game that already occupies a permanent spot in my gaming quiver and goes with me to every convention and just expands it so that there's even more there for me to share with people. But that's Avignon Pilgrimage, the expansion to Avignon: A Clash of Popes from Buttonshy Games. Check it out on Kickstarter, and I'll go ahead and let you know when that launches. I'm sure I'll be backing it, and I'll be sharing it on my Twitter, which is probably where you found a link to this video. Anyway, thank you very much, guys. Bearded Rogue out.